Warning: extremely disturbing material concerning grooming, CSA, coercion, and peril are discussed. When Talia mentioned how Tate would become violent and physical if Noah slept in another place as teens, or Tate would drag Noah down the hall against the blonde's wishes, Andrew had initially thought that Tate's developmental disability had caused him to act like a child. But now, he understood that Tate wanted to keep Noah and himself safe more than he cared about Noah's choices or autonomy. Noah couldn't make the right decision because Tate wouldn't give him the information, probably because Noah knowing would be more dangerous than not knowing. Tate's arrested development as a teen was probably the result of a gay hate crime Tate endured at 15 and couldn't divulge. This is why Tate broke and smashed things in the blue house when Noah wasn't around. Tate's fiancé, lover, predators, and abusive father were in the room, and Tate was too terrified to say a word. Imagine being 18 and realizing that the body that kept you safe ran from your bed and left you in a house that would wait until dark and your rapists would close in on you. Every time Noah fled the blue house or slept in the spare room, Tate was left alone with his rapists, and no one had a clue or probably cared enough to prevent the assaults. This is why Tate slept with a cocked, loaded weapon next to his bedside, which was something Talia had told Andrew. When Tate said he was terrified at the house settling, creaking, and noises, he wasn't talking about having nightmares. He meant that he was terrified someone would come in and hurt him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside, the world moved on, unaware. Inside, the weight of decades of trauma, unspoken bonds, and invisible survival strategies hung thick in the air, pressing down on Andrew, Susie, and the fragile shadow of Tate still waiting downstairs. Andrew didn't reach that conclusion easily. For a long time, he had tried to fit Tate and Noah into familiar categories: friendship, obsession, maybe even a strange kind of love. But the longer he watched them, the less those labels made sense. Tate kept Noah closer than anyone else. He insisted that Noah sleep in his bed. If Noah tried to sleep somewhere else, Tate either dragged him back or positioned himself against Noah's door like a barricade. At first, it looked like jealousy or control. That's what everyone assumed. Andrew had begun to notice the difference between possession and strategy. Tate wasn't clinging to Noah. Tate's two relationship rules for Noah were to spend the night in my bed and to spend every minute together. Tate was positioning him. The realization unsettled Andrew when it finally formed clearly in his mind. The relationship Tate had with Noah wasn't really friendship, and it wasn't romantic either. Tate kept Noah around as a bodyguard. Or more precisely, as a barrier to shield himself from abuse. If Noah was with him, then Tate was never alone. And if Tate was never alone, then his lover and father couldn't corner him. Andrew thought back to the scattered pieces of information he had gathered over time. Tate's pulse racing in the middle of the night, his constant awareness of doors and hallways, the way he always seemed to place Noah between himself and certain people in crowded rooms, the locked doors that Tate was anal about, especially when Noah tried to slip out at night but the door was locked. Noah felt like Tate was trying to control him, but Tate locked doors not just to keep Noah in but to keep Tate's lover out. None of it had looked like fear to Noah. It looked like fear for Tate, or perhaps fear of what might happen if Noah wasn't there. And yet there was another piece to the puzzle that didn't fit neatly. If Tate believed his lover might harm Noah, why didn't he simply tell someone, his mother for example? Adults existed, authorities existed, protection existed. But Tate had never said anything. Not to teachers, not to family, not even to Noah. Andrew understood the reason only after considering the final, uncomfortable truth. Every authority figure but Talia knew about Tate's lover and familial abuse. When Wayne told Talia, "How do you not know? Everyone I've met around Tate knows." This is what Wayne was talking about. The teachers at school didn't know, the neighbors didn't know, but every adult who had sat at the blue table or had gone to parties in Tate's house knew it. That's why Tate had never gone to authority figures, because they were all in on it. There was another dark reason why Tate had never called the police. The Blues owned the police and Tate loved the man, his lover. Tate's family had to know. Tate's aunts, uncles, and father had to know. It was a conspiracy of the worst kind. There was no way somebody could have a 9-year relationship with a minor and nobody in the family would not know something if a man was going down the hall and slipping into Tate's room. At least one male in that family had to have known. His lover was a puzzle piece in a bigger puzzle. Tate still loved him. That complicated everything. Tate didn't tell on his lover, Jay, because his fiancée had once protected Tate from childhood abusers like Terrence in the early 1970s. If Tate exposed him, if he told his mother or anyone else the full truth, it would mean destroying the person he cared about. It would mean consequences that Tate might not be ready to face: punishment, separation, humiliation, maybe even prison, depending on what had really happened between them. It would ultimately destroy the peaceful life Noah enjoyed and trusted in, and Tate wouldn't allow Noah to feel shame, blame, or fear. And Tate wasn't willing to do that. Instead, he had built a quieter solution. Keep Noah nearby. Never be alone. Control the circumstances. What if telling on his lover would reveal another secret, the truth Tate asked his mother to? Let it lie. If his lover came looking for him again, there would always be another person present. Another set of eyes, another witness, another body in the room made confrontation less likely. Andrew rubbed his temples slowly as the logic settled in his mind. It was a tragic kind of loyalty. Tate was protecting Noah from a man he refused to betray. Which meant Tate was trapped between two opposing instincts: love for his lover and responsibility for Noah's safety. The result was the strange, suffocating arrangement everyone had observed but never fully understood. Noah thought Tate was possessive. Others thought Tate was jealous or obsessive. But Andrew suspected the truth was far more complicated. Tate wasn't keeping Noah close just because he couldn't live without him. He was keeping Noah close because Noah's presence made it harder for the person Tate loved to reach him alone. And the most painful part of it all was this: Tate had chosen to carry that burden silently. He would rather let Noah misunderstand him, let everyone misunderstand him, than expose the man he still cared about. Tate's love for that man was the most natural and unnatural love that could exist simultaneously for the boy. In Tate's mind, that was the only way to protect both of them at once. If the secret illicit relationship had been with a mere teacher or an adult neighbor, Andrew wouldn't have seen any problems with Tate calling the police or telling his mom, but the reality was so dark. Tate would never live it down if he ever let the real reason slip. The identity of Tate's lover wasn't merely an inconvenience but an unbearable knowledge Tate carried with him for years. If Tate told the police, Tate Blue's name would be infamously synonymous with his lover for the rest of his life. Tate would be the brunt of every insensitive joke and cruel snicker. Andrew leaned against the cool wall of the dining room, the late afternoon light slanting across the dusty floor. He had replayed the moment over and over in his mind, the way he always did when the pieces of a puzzle finally fell into place. Earlier, a lucid Tate had let it slip, the man's name. It had been casual, almost offhand, but it hit Andrew differently than anything before. That name carried weight, implications, connections he hadn't realized. And suddenly, he understood why Tate never told Noah the truth. Because Noah already knew the man. Noah must have seen him a few hundred times throughout the years, saw evidence of the triangle, and interpreted normal encounters with Tate as fights, so Noah never knew. Not the dangerous, secretive side Tate had feared, but the version everyone had seen, the public version. The man named Jay Noah knew wasn't a family friend, but someone who put Noah at ease for one good reason: he wanted to get Noah alone to groom the blonde. Jay was someone Noah had hugged, shared drinks with, kissed sweetly, laughed beside at crowded parties, and even stayed in the same house with during visits. Someone familiar, someone trusted, someone who belonged in the social orbit of the Blues' friends. There was no way in 20 years Noah hadn't sat once on the guy's lap, kissed the man's cheek, said "I love you," or held his hand. If Noah ever found out, the truth would destroy every memory the blonde enjoyed. Andrew's eyes shifted to the image of the Blue family and friends portrait wall in the living room, burned into his memory. Associates, close friends, and business partners, people who were supposed to be part of the household's inner circle. And there among them was the man's face, Jay's framed and smiling facade as if he belonged there. Andrew's eyes focused on each picture of parties and birthdays. The guy was in every photograph, touching Tate's shoulder, smiling behind the boys. That explained Tate's behavior for years: the anxiety, the rigid insistence that Noah sleep beside him, the nights spent pressed against Noah's door like a human barricade. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't an obsession. It was a strategy. And suddenly, other things made sense too. The way Tate had reacted to authority figures, the way he would flip off certain photos, the quiet hostility toward people he didn't trust. All of it traced back to the man in the picture, the one he loved and feared in equal measure. It also explained why at Noah and Tate's old house the walls had only ever displayed photographs of the two of them. No extended circle, no friends, no family, only Noah and Tate. A controlled space, a minimized world, safe. Tate had separated the people Noah believed they were from the people Tate knew them to be. Tate couldn't bear having their faces displayed throughout the Rambler. Photographs of people Noah loved or trusted, including Talia, weren't comforting family portraits to Tate. They were reminders of people who had abused him and deliberately maintained a false reality around Noah. So Tate made a strict rule: their photographs and profiles were not to appear in the Rambler. He didn't want to walk into a room and see their faces staring back at him. He didn't want Noah surrounded by photographs of people who, in Tate's eyes, had spent years deceiving him. And he especially didn't want those photographs normalized as symbols of a loving family when Tate knew what had happened behind closed doors. For Noah, a photograph might have represented a mother, an uncle, a family friend, or someone he trusted. For Tate, the same photograph represented a secret. That contrast made the Rambler itself another part of Tate's attempt to protect Noah. If the walls didn't display those faces, at least Tate didn't have to constantly confront the people behind the deception. Andrew remembered that the Blue family, especially Talia, gave enormous donations to pediatric charities. The realization made him feel sick. The family that Andrew now understood as being responsible for horrific child abuse and sexual abuse had given money to build pediatric wings. They had written enormous checks to children's hospitals. They had attached their names to places supposedly dedicated to protecting vulnerable children. And then Andrew thought about the plaques. Oh my God! Their faces were on those plaques. Their names were on the walls. Some of those hospital wings had been named after the very people Tate believed had abused children. No wonder Tate had taken their plaques down. No wonder he couldn't stand looking at their photographs. To everyone else, those plaques represented generosity, philanthropy, and a family giving back to the community. To Tate, they represented something grotesque. The Blue Wing at the hospital had been financed and named after people Tate believed were responsible for sexual violence and abuse against kids. Andrew couldn't stop thinking about the hypocrisy of it. Every year, Terrence would cut a ginormous check and donate it to the pediatric wing of the hospital. He had helped build it, helped finance it, and made certain the Blue name was prominently displayed. It had become almost ritualistic. A wealthy family giving millions to children. A powerful patriarch publicly presenting himself as a protector of children. And behind the charitable image was the reality Tate had spent his life trying to hide. Terrence had built a monument to protecting children's health while using his own son as the price of maintaining that monument, and trafficking his young toddler boy to various wealthy men in New York City. Andrew finally understood why Tate couldn't tolerate those names and faces surrounding him. The plaques weren't just plaques. They were reminders of the lie. The hospital saw philanthropists. The public saw generous benefactors. Andrew saw something else entirely. He saw a family using charity to construct a beautiful public monument over something rotten underneath. And Tate couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Susie had told Andrew what Tate had said to Talia when Tate's mother confronted him about removing the Blue family's names and plaques from the pediatric hospital walls. Talia had accused her son of being narcissistic. She had pointed out that Tate had removed the family's names and photographs and then displayed his own face instead. To her, it looked like Tate had simply replaced his family's legacy with his own. But the truth was much darker. Tate had looked at his mother and told her that sick children just wanted to get well. They didn't want to look at crusty old men staring down at them. At the time, Talia had apparently taken the statement as another example of Tate's arrogance. Andrew understood what Tate had really meant. Children didn't deserve to have people Tate believed were pedophiles displayed on the walls of a children's hospital, staring down at them as though they were pieces of meat. Vulnerable children didn't need those faces watching them while they were sick, frightened, nauseous, and exhausted. They certainly didn't need to see the faces of men who, according to Tate, had mastered hypocrisy and deception, men who could publicly present themselves as protectors of children while privately harming them. The plaques had represented philanthropy to everyone else. To Tate, they represented something profoundly disturbing. A sick child lying in a hospital bed shouldn't have to look up at a wall and see the smiling face of someone Tate believed had abused children. That wasn't a legacy worth preserving. That wasn't protection. And it wasn't something Tate was willing to leave hanging above vulnerable children simply because the people responsible had written large checks. Andrew finally understood why Tate had removed the plaques. He hadn't been trying to make himself more important. He had been trying to make those faces disappear. Every single one of Tate's abusers was dead. Tate would never get justice for what had happened to him. There would be no courtroom where they could be confronted, no punishment that could undo what they had done, no opportunity for Tate to hear them admit what they had done to him. So Tate did the only thing he believed he could do. He erased their legacy. He removed every award, every dedication, every name, every tribute, every plaque, every photograph, every public display celebrating the reputations of the people who had hurt him. He tore down his entire family's legacy. Except for Tate's face, Tate's name, Tate's political clout. None of his family would ever again be displayed in positions of reverence or honor if Tate had anything to say about it. To the public, it could have looked narcissistic. It could have looked like Tate was replacing generations of family history with his own image. But Andrew understood the difference. Tate wasn't trying to make himself worshipped. He was refusing to let the people who had abused him continue being worshipped by ignorant blind onlookers. That was what Tate had meant when he told his mother, 25 years from now, no one will remember these men, but they'll remember the man who owns the company now. At the time, Talia had heard arrogance. Andrew heard something else. Revenge. Tate couldn't put his abusers in prison. He couldn't make them answer for what they had done. He couldn't force the world to see them as Tate had seen them. But he could take away the thing they had spent their lives building. Their notoriety. Their prestige. Their names on buildings. Their photographs on walls. Their awards. Their dedications. Their carefully manufactured reputations. Tate couldn't erase what they had done to him. But he could make certain they would no longer be honored for it. That became Tate's revenge. He didn't want their names remembered. He wanted their names forgotten. Andrew eventually understood that Tate's campaign went far beyond removing names from plaques. Tate wanted to humiliate his family and destroy the meaning of the Blue name. He wanted the last name Blue to become synonymous with everything his family had hidden behind its wealth and prestige: sexual perversion, exploitation, orgies, and inappropriate sexual conduct. That was why, after Terrence died, Tate had invited adult strippers into his father's office. It wasn't simply reckless behavior. It was deliberate humiliation. Tate wanted to desecrate Terrence's legacy. He wanted his father remembered not as the respectable patriarch who had built an empire, but as the man who had fathered the supposed man-whore who eventually took control of his company. And Tate intended to become more successful than Terrence ever had. Then he would use that money to erase the family that had come before him. Except for Uncle Joey, Jay, and himself, Tate wanted every member of the Blue family removed from the company's history. In Tate's mind, the previous 700 years of family history were contaminated by abuse and exploitation, and he refused to allow those people a single footnote in the company he now controlled. To Tate's employees, he was the founder. Not the heir. Not the son of Terrence Blue. The founder. Anyone who mentioned his family or attempted to restore their names to positions of honor could find themselves fired. Tate wanted to humiliate every man who had humiliated him as a child. He wanted to take everything they had valued: respectability, prestige, notoriety, family honor, public admiration, and strip it away. And if his mother or Noah's friends from Brown thought Tate was narcissistic, arrogant, or an awful man for disrespecting his betters, Tate could live with that. In some ways, Andrew realized Tate preferred it. Because being hated for being narcissistic was easier than allowing people to know the truth. It was better for Noah's friends to think Tate was an egotistical bastard than to understand that the men they had held in such high esteem were, according to Tate's memories, monsters who touched kids. Tate had spent his childhood being forced to protect the family's reputation. Now he was spending his adulthood destroying it. Andrew eventually understood that Tate had no intention of carrying the Blue name into another generation. As long as Talia didn't have any more children, Tate never planned on having children himself. He had even undergone a medical procedure so he would never have to worry about fathering children of his own. Tate refused to continue the Blue bloodline. He couldn't imagine bringing another innocent child into the world only to someday have to tell that child, "Everyone you're related to, except for your father Tate, was a pedophile." Tate would rather let the family tree die than allow another child to inherit a name built upon generations of suffering. The Blue name to Tate wasn't an inheritance. It was a blue and green family curse the Blue dynasty hid. During one of Tate's family's past charity events, raising money to protect children's health, Tate had learned something about prevention. There were institutions and foundations that had selected colors like blue or green to represent survivors of incest and childhood sexual abuse in the context of public awareness campaigns. Tate had spent time walking through the different displays, reading the information provided by the organizations and learning about the different ways they tried to bring attention to children who had been harmed. He learned that the colors were meant to create recognition, conversation, and awareness, giving survivors and advocates a visible symbol that people could understand and recognize. Andrew noticed the irony. Tate's last name was Blue, as was his favorite color, while Noah's favorite color was bold green. It was an ironic twist of fate that Tate and Noah's favorite colors were symbols for things Tate had survived. Andrew couldn't help but notice how strangely those colors seemed to follow them, almost as though something Tate and Noah had simply chosen because they liked the colors had unknowingly taken on a much deeper meaning. It was even more ironic that Tate's favorite color was blue because that seemed to be the sexual taste of Tate's family, the Blues. Andrew thought bitterly about the Blue family's dark reputation, that they enjoyed sleeping with their own family and fucking their own, a crude Blue euphemism for incest. Andrew found the connection deeply unsettling. The family name, the color Tate loved most, and the horrible things Tate had survived seemed to overlap in a way that felt almost cruel. Tate had carried the Blue name his entire life, never realizing how much darkness had existed behind it. Andrew remembered looking at Tate and wondering whether the irony had ever occurred to him before. Blue was supposed to be just a color. It was supposed to be Tate's favorite color, something harmless and familiar, something that belonged to him. Yet because of the Blue family's history, even something as simple as a favorite color seemed to carry another meaning. And then there was Noah and his bold green. Andrew couldn't help thinking about how strange fate could be. Tate and Noah had their own favorite colors, completely separate from the family's secrets, yet those colors had become symbols connected to the things Tate had survived. It was an unsettling coincidence, one Andrew couldn't ignore. For Tate, the Blue name had always been part of his identity, but now even the color blue seemed to carry the shadow of everything that name represented. The teal green, or teal ribbon, was most notably associated with sexual assault and violence awareness, supporting survivors and promoting consent. Andrew also knew that teal was used in awareness campaigns for PTSD, anxiety disorders, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, conditions Tate suffered from. Andrew remembers Tate standing beside a charity display before attending Brown, quietly reading the information. There was something almost painfully ironic about it. The ribbon represented survivors. It represented trauma. It represented the importance of consent and protecting people from sexual violence. And Tate had spent much of his life carrying the consequences of exactly those things. Andrew wondered if Tate understood just how much the little ribbon seemed to describe his life without ever mentioning his name. Tate had already been thinking about changing his last name permanently. Eventually, he wanted nothing to do with Blue at all. To Tate, the name had become as poisonous as names associated with notorious figures such as Epstein, Weinstein, Rothschild, Savile, or Cosby. He didn't want it attached to him anymore. In fact, Tate had secretly changed his last name the moment his father died, and filed his annulment papers to end his sham marriage to Chloe. Tate became a lunatic. He didn't announce it. He didn't make a ceremony out of it. He simply changed it. Andrew thought that was perhaps the clearest statement Tate had ever made about his family. He wasn't trying to inherit Terrence's identity. He was trying to escape it. And there was one thing Tate associated with his life that wasn't contaminated by the blue name. Noah. Noah had been the only genuinely good thing Tate believed he had ever experienced. That was why Tate displayed Noah's artwork from Brown University on the walls at the Blue headquarters. Not Terrence's paintings. Not the family's portraits. Not their awards. Not their names. Noah's art. Andrew finally understood what that meant. Tate had spent years tearing his family's legacy down, but he hadn't left the walls empty. He replaced their legacy with the one thing he actually wanted to remember. Noah. Andrew's mind raced to the final piece of the puzzle. If Noah had been in Tate's bed every night for protection, if he had been the living barrier between Tate and the man he feared, why wasn't that still the case with Jay? Why had the rule faded, and then it clicked? There was no threat anymore. Linus and Terrence were dead, distant, or neutralized in some way that removed the danger. Tate no longer needed Noah as a shield. Andrew felt the weight of realization settle into his chest. For years, everyone had misread the situation. They thought Tate's attachment to Noah was obsessive, jealous, or romantic, but it hadn't been about desire, it had been about protection, survival. Noah hadn't known he had played such a critical role, not just as a companion but as a guardian, a literal buffer keeping someone Tate loved safe from himself, or from the potential harm he feared. Andrew exhaled slowly, shaking his head. The pieces of the puzzle had been right there all along. They had just needed to be seen in the right light. "Oh my God," Andrew whispered into the quiet hallway, the words barely audible over the hum of the evening. It all made sense now, every rule. Every insistence, every tension-filled night Tate had endured. And now the truth loomed large. Tate had carried that fear silently for years, and Noah had lived unknowingly in the center of it all. Tate couldn't stay warm because his body would descend into mild shock whenever he slept alone or was terrified he heard something in the hallway. He clutched Noah's little compact, toasty warm body to stay close and feel safety over fear. Andrew sank into the corner of the room, the shadows of late afternoon stretching across the concrete floor. His mind was replaying fragments of conversations, stories, and memories that now fit together with chilling precision. When had the man first noticed Tate? The reality hit Andrew. The relationship must have started in NYC no later than Tate's 4th birthday. Before meeting Noah, the question had lingered in his mind since Tate had casually let the name slip earlier. Andrew could feel the weight of the timeline pressing on him. And then he remembered something Talia had said the very first time she and Andrew had met. Her voice, calm but incredulous, echoed in his memory. Wayne had fled from the house the Blues owned in NYC in 1972 before their move to LA, she had said, and later I was told he vomited in the car. Andrew froze. Oh no. It clicked. The intensity, the fear, the terror in that first encounter, that had been the seed, the starting point. The very first moment Wayne became a presence in Tate's life that would twist everything after it. Then it all made sense. The hypersexuality Tate displayed when he was a teen, his obsession with control, the extremes of desire and intimacy, the way he manipulated closeness and boundaries was no longer a random trait or a youthful quirk. It was a reaction, a coping mechanism born out of years of fear, attraction, and the psychological imprint of Wayne's presence. Andrew ran his hands down his face. Wayne fled the home when Tate was 4, no wonder Wayne never went back. Tate had been a kid, barely navigating the boundaries of normal life, and suddenly he was thrust into a world where his body and mind were hijacked by desire, fear, and danger all at once. He could picture it now, Wayne fleeing the house in terror, vomiting in the car, every muscle taut with instinct and panic. And Tate, a mere child reacting to it, internalizing it, his body and psyche amplifying into the hypersexual, controlling, intensely vigilant person Andrew had known. The pieces clicked into place. Tate's obsessive behaviors toward Noah, the constant need for proximity, the nights spent guarding the door, the rigid rules about who could enter Tate's space, all of it made sense. It wasn't just jealousy or possessiveness. It was the echo of the first encounter with Wayne, amplified over years into patterns of survival, desire, and control. Andrew's stomach sank as he put the pieces together, each detail darkening the picture he had been trying to form for years. The way Tate had behaved, the obsessive vigilance, the hypersexuality, the strange, protective arrangements with Noah, it all had roots deeper than Andrew had imagined. Wayne had first met the adult man Jay in Tate's home, polite introductions, casual smiles, the kind of visit that seemed harmless on the surface. But that night things had taken a far darker turn. One of those adults, or perhaps a few of the blues, mature men Wayne knew, had slipped into Tate's room. Quietly, deliberately, unaware of Wayne tucked in a sleeping bag behind the bed, observing. And then it happened. Incestuous illegal sex and egregious rape of a minor. Jay might have been there, but Terrence definitely was. Andrew had always understood that distinction mattered. Jay was a young boy himself, 10 years older than Tate, a ward of the family who had become a permanent member of their household in NYC. He was someone who belonged there, someone Talia trusted, someone who was supposed to be part of the family's protection and safety. And yet, if Jay slipped into Tate's room, a man Talia trusted had entered Tate's bedroom many nights before Tate was 5, abusing and raping the small boy. The man must not have seen Wayne behind the bed. Wayne had been there, hidden away, and somehow he became the face of Tate's victimization in Andrew's memories of what Tate had eventually revealed. Tate had been caught between vulnerability and instinct, far too young to understand what was happening to him or why the person who should have protected him was instead hurting him. He had been sleeping while Wayne listened in hiding. The sounds, the movements, the intimacy played out just feet from him. And Wayne, despite witnessing it all, had said nothing. Not a word to anyone. Not even a whisper to warn Tate. That silence was one of the things Andrew found hardest to understand. Wayne had been close enough to know that something terrible was happening, close enough to intervene, and yet he remained hidden. For Tate, the person who should have represented safety had instead become permanently associated with the memory of being powerless and unprotected. Andrew often wondered whether that was why Tate remembered certain faces, rooms, and moments with such painful clarity. The abuse itself had been horrific, but the silence surrounding it had taught Tate something equally devastating, that someone could witness a child suffering and still choose not to help. What made Wayne's betrayal even worse, Andrew thought, was that he had not simply remained silent. He had eventually profited from Tate's suffering and humiliation. He had taken what he had witnessed as leverage, using the knowledge against Tate and blackmailing the heir with the threat that his secrets would be exposed. Andrew could hardly imagine what that must have felt like for Tate, being humiliated in front of his own childhood friend by someone from his own family surviving horrific abuse, and then realizing that the young boy he had trusted enough to welcome into his home in New York City had witnessed something so private and devastating, and had chosen to turn it into a weapon. Wayne had laughed at Tate. He had made what happened to him into a joke. Years later, Wayne had even made light of it in front of Noah, apparently forgetting, or simply not caring, how deeply those memories had wounded Tate. It was shortly after Joey had died, when Tate was already overwhelmed by grief and everything else he had been carrying. Andrew remembered how quickly Tate had snapped. Wayne had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Tate had kicked and attacked him in the restaurant bar, finally responding to years of humiliation, threats, and cruelty that had been buried beneath his carefully controlled exterior. To Andrew, the incident wasn't simply about Tate losing his temper. It was about a lifetime of betrayal finally erupting. Andrew remembered Noah telling the psychologist how Wayne would talk to Tate and about Tate. Tate would say things like, "How's your normal, everyday life, Tate? Say hi to the family for me. I heard your bastard of a father died. I never thought he would die too." At the time, the words had sounded cruel and deliberately provocative, but now Andrew understood why Wayne had called Terrence a motherfucker. The insult carried another implication, one connected to the family's history of incest, and the way Wayne used that history to humiliate Tate. What sounded like a vulgar insult on the surface had a much darker meaning underneath it. Andrew remembered how Noah had struggled to understand why Wayne spoke that way about Tate, especially when he knew what Tate had already survived. Wayne wasn't simply mocking Tate. He was deliberately reaching for the most painful parts of Tate's history and turning them into weapons. And that, Andrew realized, was what made Wayne's behavior so vicious. He knew exactly where the wounds were, and he kept pressing on them. Andrew remembered Noah sharing how he had asked Talia at a Blue Family and Associates dinner who Wayne was. Noah hadn't realized he was asking about Tate's nightly cereal grapes in front of Tate's grapists. Jay, Terrence, Linus, and many other predators that Tate had unfortunately trusted as a small child sat at the table, which was why Tate angrily told Noah to be quiet, and the topic was never brought up again for many years. Andrew shivered at the thought. Wayne, having seen the illegal activity that happened to Tate, could tell by how Tate had reacted after the assault that it wasn't just a one-time act either. Wayne could tell. It was clear to him in subtle cues, in the way Tate moved, in the way the room had been arranged, that this wasn't the first time such an encounter had happened. Tate had been through this before, had endured it before, and Wayne had been a silent observer from some hidden corner of the room. The implications hit Andrew like ice water. No wonder Tate's behavior had spiraled in certain ways. The hypersexuality, the clinging of toddler Tate to everyone's legs, the need for control, the obsessive placement of people around him, the insistence that Noah sleep beside him, guarding doors, creating a barrier. Every act was a response to trauma, every boundary a strategy for survival. Wayne had seen a crime happen and had done nothing. That silence had defined years of Tate's life. It had shaped the patterns of fear, desire, and vigilance that Andrew had observed so carefully. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. This wasn't just about past encounters. This was the origin point, the catalyst that explained so much of Tate's intense, sometimes incomprehensible behavior. Every obsessive act, every careful control of space and people could be traced back to that night. "Oh my God," Andrew whispered to the quiet garage, the words nearly lost to the shadows around him. Wayne's inaction had left a scar, and Tate had carried it forward silently, with Noah as both shield and companion, guarding against the world in ways that no one else had understood. Andrew leaned back against the hallway wall, the evening shadows deepening around him, and let his mind settle into the truth he had been circling for years. Everyone had thought they understood Tate, that he was obsessed with Noah, that he was secretly in love with the blonde boy who slept beside him, followed him everywhere, and bore the weight of Tate's strange, suffocating vigilance. But they were all wrong. Tate wasn't just in love with Noah. Loving Noah, Tate knew, would expose all of the Blues' secrets. It would unearth the truth about what had happened with Wayne, about the boundaries Tate had been forced to build, about the obsessive strategies he had relied upon to survive. It would destroy everything, everyone, all the lives tangled into the web of his past. And yet Noah had always loved him blindly, hoping for reciprocity. Tate had carried that weight silently, never revealing the truth, never allowing the line between protection and affection to blur into confession. Andrew understood now why, at 25, Tate had suddenly had a violent meltdown 3 years ago. It wasn't about Noah. It was about the accumulation of everything Tate had carried, 3 secrets, 3 impossible truths that had defined his life. The crime he had endured, the trauma Wayne had witnessed and ignored, and the impossibility of loving Noah without exposing it all. Andrew's heart ached as he traced the lines in his mind. 26 years, and Tate had kept it all inside. And now the pressures had converged. The fear, the memory, the instinct to protect, and the impossibility of love had erupted, shattering the delicate control Tate had maintained for decades. "Oh," Andrew whispered softly, voice barely audible in the quiet garage. "Now I see why." It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't obsession with Noah, it wasn't misplaced desire. It was survival, it was protection. It was love in its most impossible, uncompromising, and devastating form. Andrew leaned against the wall, breathing slowly, letting the enormity of it settle in. For the first time, the pieces aligned, not just the behaviors, not just the obsessive closeness with Noah, but the entire architecture of Tate's life, the invisible rules, the desperate vigilance, the silent burdens that had shaped him. And now, for the first time, Andrew understood the truth. Everything Tate had done, every meltdown, every obsessive act, every secretive maneuver had been dictated by that impossible love. Andrew leaned against Tate's bedroom wall, the evening light heavy with unspoken truths. He finally understood the architecture of Tate's life, the way every decision, every obsessive behavior, every strange, suffocating closeness with Noah had been shaped by forces no one else could comprehend. Tate had 3 secrets, only 3, but each one carried the weight of a lifetime. The first was his lover Jay, and the toxic love triangle that had defined the trajectory of Tate's emotional world. Loving him had been natural, instinctive, unavoidable, but it had also been impossible. The triangle had been fraught with fear, jealousy, desire, and secrecy, and the consequences of revealing it were unthinkable. Exposing it would have upended everything Tate had built and everyone he had tried to protect. The second secret was why he had started his relationship with Noah and the reasons why Noah had to constantly be nearby. It wasn't romantic at first, it was survival. Noah had been a shield, a living barrier between Tate and his father, then later Jay, a buffer against the impossible truths Tate couldn't share. The closeness, the sleeping arrangements, the obsessive vigilance, it was all strategy. Everyone misread it as obsession or love, when in reality it had been the only way to survive the complexities of the love triangle without destruction. Tate's third and final secret was deeply connected to why the number 3 was so important to him, which was the main reason he had the number 3 on his cyan-colored keychain. Tate had 3 secrets, and the number had become a quiet symbol of everything he carried but rarely spoke about. It wasn't just a random number or a meaningless preference. 3 had quietly appeared throughout Tate's life in ways that Andrew had only gradually begun to understand. Tate had also lived on the 3rd level of his family's New York City house, the same house where Wayne had unfortunately seen Tate's family hurt him. That made the number 3 even more difficult to separate from Tate's childhood memories. The 3rd level wasn't simply another floor of the house. It had become part of the place where some of Tate's most painful memories had been formed, and where Wayne had witnessed what was happening to him without protecting him. Tate also had 3 locked boxes at his secret storage unit. That was where he kept everything he had collected and preserved about his family, the evidence, documents, photographs, records, and other pieces of information that could expose the truth about what had happened. Andrew remembered that Tate had been obsessively careful about keeping those things protected. The storage unit wasn't simply a place for possessions. It was where Tate had hidden the history he couldn't bear to destroy but couldn't safely keep in his home. And among the things Tate kept there was Jay's preserved heart, another deeply personal piece of his past that Tate had refused to let disappear. The only person besides Jay who had consistently protected Tate during his childhood was Uncle Joey, and Joey lived 3 doors down from Tate and Noah's room. Even Tate's inheritance had been released in 3 separate segments when he was 13, 18, and 22. Andrew began to see a pattern. Tate's life seemed to fit into 3 distinct periods: before Noah, and after he had married Chloe. 3 had followed Tate through his childhood, his inheritance, his relationships, his secrets, and the people who had either protected him or changed the course of his life. But the 3 secrets were the most important reason. The number 3 wasn't simply something Tate liked. It was a reminder that there were 3 truths about his life that he had carried silently for years, 3 secrets that had shaped him, 3 pieces of his past that he had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep hidden. And even the 3 lock boxes reflected that same pattern. To Andrew, it seemed as though Tate had turned the number 3 into a private language. It represented his secrets, his evidence, his inheritance, the important places in his childhood, and the different periods of his life. And perhaps that was why Tate kept the number 3 with him. It was a small, private symbol of everything he had survived, everything he had concealed, everything he had preserved, and the 3 secrets that had defined so much of his life. Tate kept quiet about his lover because it would also expose the family's secrets, and that couldn't happen. Andrew's chest tightened as he processed it all. Each secret alone was enough to shape a life. Together they explained everything: Tate's hypersexuality, his obsessive protection of Noah, the rules about sleeping arrangements, the rigid control of his environment. They explained the meltdowns at 28, the emotional intensity, the quiet fear that ran beneath his carefully constructed composure. It was terrifying to understand. Terrifying to see how much of Tate's life had been dictated by these invisible truths. And yet, Andrew also saw the method behind it. Every act, every obsessive habit, every calculated closeness to Noah had been a way of navigating a world that had, from the very beginning, demanded that Tate hide, protect, and survive. "Oh my God," Andrew whispered into the empty garage, his voice trembling slightly. Tate's arrested development was not behavioral but due to trauma. Tate must have experienced the shower assault at 15, a betrayal that traumatized him so much that, regardless of his age, he still acted like a hormonal, horny, angry, and enraged prepubescent child. Whenever Tate experienced something he couldn't handle emotionally or didn't get his way, he acted like a 2-year-old, breaking things and screaming or threatening people because he didn't have the capability to express himself, because expressing himself would probably get him killed. 3 secrets, a lover, a shielded relationship, and the darkness that made Tate believe himself vile. 3 forces that had defined Tate's life, controlled his actions, and shaped the man everyone thought they knew. Andrew exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it settle. At last, he understood why Tate had done what he had done, why he had feared intimacy and exposure, and why, even now, the ghosts of those secrets still guided him. Andrew sank lower against the garage wall, the weight of understanding pressing down on him. And then it clicked, something he hadn't fully realized until that moment. No wonder he had noticed Tate. It wasn't just intuition or curiosity. It wasn't just observation. Andrew lived the same existence. He had grown up navigating the same treacherous terrain, had carried the same shameful background that taught him how to hide, how to survive with fear and desire tangled together like barbed wire around the heart. Of course he'd noticed the signs. The tension in Tate's shoulders when he entered a room. The way his eyes scanned for danger, for people, for threats that no one else could see. The obsessive control over the space around him, the rigid rules, the protective rituals, the way he insisted Noah sleep beside him. Andrew recognized all of it because he had built the same invisible armor around himself, because he had learned the same lessons the hard way. The hypersexuality, the bursts of obsession, the quiet meltdowns, they weren't random. They were language-coded signals of fear and trauma and survival. And Andrew, having carried his own scars, could read that language with a clarity no one else could. Why Tate had seen every man or queer individual circling Noah as a threat and not as a suitor. Andrew shivered, remembering all the moments he had observed Tate over the years, moments he now understood weren't quirks or flaws, they were survival mechanisms. The compulsive vigilance, the controlling behaviors, the secrets that weighed so heavily, they all made sense now. Every pattern, every instinctive action, every odd food topping was a reflection of the life Tate had been forced to live, a life Andrew knew all too well. It was terrifying and clarifying all at once. "Oh," Andrew whispered, the word barely audible. "Of course, that's why I saw it, that's why I understood." He exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing slightly. It wasn't just empathy, it was recognition. A mirror. Tate's actions, his obsessions, his compulsions, they resonated because Andrew had lived a parallel existence, had felt the same fears, carried the same shame, and learned the same lessons in silence. No wonder he had noticed Tate. No wonder he had understood. Some truths didn't need explanation when you had already lived them yourself. Andrew's mind raced as he pieced it all together, the tension in the garage suddenly unbearable. Someone in Tate's family had to know something. Tate had to have told someone, or a person must have seen something. Tate could not have survived decades of fear, obsession, and secrecy without a single soul noticing, or at least suspecting. But today, Andrew knew the truth. Tate had no chance as a young boy, no escape, no one to intervene. He had been utterly alone in the world, carrying horrors no one could comprehend, and the thought of revealing any of it to Noah out of the question. No way in hell would he taint Noah with the truth. Because Tate had given Noah a wonderful family, two loving parents who actually were normal, adults who cared for him and provided Noah with a foundation Tate had never known. Money and stability, a safe place to sleep, holidays filled with warmth and laughter instead of fear and control. And on top of that, Tate's love, a love that to Noah was protective and obsessive but also deeply tender. Andrew's chest tightened. He could see it clearly now. Every lie Tate told Noah, every carefully constructed facade, every obsessive insistence on proximity, on vigilance, on rules, it had been an act of love, of protection. Tate had lied every day because the truth would have destroyed Noah's world. It would have tainted everything good he had been given, everything Tate had tried to protect him from. And the last thing Tate would ever allow was for Noah, the boy he had come to love in his own complicated, unyielding way, to see the darkness that had shaped Tate's life. It wasn't possessiveness, it wasn't jealousy, it wasn't some twisted form of control, it was preservation. Everything Noah had believed was given to him by Tate and the Blue family, every wonderful memory was a lie so dark the blonde would never recover. Andrew leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. Suddenly, the obsessive behaviors, the strange rules, the endless closeness, the sleepless nights, it all made perfect sense. Tate had been shielding Noah from a truth that could have crushed him. Tate had been guarding him with his very presence, lying every day to keep him safe. And that's why, Andrew whispered to himself, his voice trembling, he lied to Noah every single day. The weight of it settled over him, heavy but understandable. Tate's life had been a labyrinth of secrets, survival, and protection, and now Andrew could finally see the logic, the love, and the heartbreak that had guided every choice. For decades, Tate had carried the burden alone, and now Andrew understood exactly why. Andrew felt the weight of the revelation settle in his chest, the air in the garage suddenly thick with understanding. Now it all made sense, the obsessive behaviors, the warnings, the strange vigilance Tate had always maintained. Noah's world would collapse if he knew the ick Tate had carried for years, the darkness, the trauma, the incest, the secrets too heavy for anyone to imagine. Tate had warned Noah countless times, "I'll hurt you, Noah, stay away." At first, Andrew had assumed it was jealousy, possessiveness, maybe frustration. But now he understood, Tate had meant it literally and figuratively. The warnings weren't empty threats, they were desperate attempts to keep Noah from being pulled into a reality he wasn't ready to face, a world full of horror and survival instincts Tate had carried alone. Andrew's mind traced the chain further. Tate had told his mother to stop digging, to let things lie. He had known she might open Pandora's box if she probed too deeply. If she had asked the wrong question, uncovered the wrong truth, it could have unleashed chaos. And it wasn't just chaos for Tate, it would have destroyed Noah's sense of safety, security, and trust. Tate couldn't allow that, not ever. The pieces clicked together. Every lie, every carefully controlled action, every obsessive rule, all of it had been a shield. Tate's love for Noah had been protective, suffocating at times and perhaps misread by everyone around them. But it had been born out of the knowledge that the world Tate had survived, the trauma he had endured, the ick he carried, would crush anyone who saw it without preparation. Andrew shook his head, realizing the full scale of what Tate had carried for decades. The obsessive closeness, the sleepless nights, the bed sharing, the hypervigilance, it had all been a way to guard Noah from truths he was never meant to face. Tate's mother, the rules of the house, even Noah's own safety and happiness had been carefully accounted for in every decision Tate had made. Andrew exhaled slowly, his voice barely audible in the quiet garage. So that's why Tate warned Noah about getting too close to Tate, that's why he lied, that's why he kept everything buried. He was protecting him, he always was. It was a revelation heavy with clarity. Tate's actions were not about control or jealousy or misplaced desire, they were acts of survival and devotion. Acts designed to shield Noah from the kind of darkness that had defined Tate's life for decades. And in that understanding, Andrew finally saw the impossible depth of Tate's love and the unbearable cost of the secrets he had carried alone. Poor Noah, if he ever glimpsed the truth, if he ever saw the real Tate behind the walls, the masks, and the lies, he would never look at him the same way again. The trust, the affection, the love Noah had poured into the man beside him, all of it would shatter. Andrew ran a hand down his face, the enormity of it settling over him. Every obsessive habit, every sleepless night, every warning Tate had ever issued, "I'll hurt you, Noah, stay away," made perfect sense. It wasn't possessiveness, it wasn't obsession, it was protection, from a truth so corrosive it could destroy both of them. Whenever Noah had asked Tate if his buddy had been in love, Tate would vomit and blame it on some other reason. The reason Tate would vomit is because the person Tate loved was someone he should never love romantically. Tate's love had always been layered with danger, fear, and vigilance. He had guarded Noah not just from the world, but from the parts of himself that he could never let escape. The facade was a shield, and Noah had loved what the shield presented, never knowing the fire it concealed. "Oh no," Andrew whispered into the quiet room, the words barely audible. Tate had carried decades of unbearable truths alone, hiding behind a mask so convincing that even the person he loved most had never known him. And now, Andrew understood why Tate's entire life had been built around secrecy, control, and careful protection. Noah had loved a ghost of Tate, and the real Tate, dark, scarred, complicated, and burdened, was a reality too dangerous to reveal. That truth alone was enough to make a man want to end himself, and Tate had lived every day with the weight of that impossible knowledge. The real Tate wasn't the charismatic, popular playboy stud or amazing buddy Noah loved for years, but the pitiful, crying wretch Noah saw twice under Tate's bed, sucking his thumb or wailing in his car after Wayne's appearance before he reset the room. Tate created a facade to mask how deeply traumatized the boy truly was. Tate had created the facade of the sexually desirable stud, the attractive, confident young man, to hide the fact that Tate's entire existence was an utter lie. Tate wasn't attractive. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't sexually confident. There wasn't one shred of integrity or accuracy about the Tate that left the house every morning because the truth was more dangerous than fiction. Tate believed his entire existence was a sin. Tate's beauty and physical attributes were the result of something so vile he couldn't even look at himself in the mirror, and it wasn't Tate's fault, but who else could he blame? The only times Noah ever saw the real Tate was when Tate broke down in tears because the reality of who Tate blew was unimaginable. Andrew began to understand why Tate had such difficulty looking at himself in the mirror. Tate's childhood abusers had looked remarkably similar to him, and seeing his own reflection could therefore bring back unwanted associations with the people who had hurt him. That was also why Wayne's cruel jokes about Tate fucking himself carried such a disturbing implication. Wayne was deliberately playing on Tate's resemblance to the people in his family. He was suggesting that Tate's relationships had involved people who looked so much like him that, in Wayne's twisted way of describing it, Tate was essentially seeing himself reflected in them. Some members of Tate's family were identical twins or otherwise remarkably similar in appearance to Tate. Wayne used those similarities to humiliate him, turning something Tate could not control, his resemblance to his own family, into another weapon against him. To Andrew, that explained why the mirror could be so difficult for Tate. He wasn't simply seeing his own face. He was seeing echoes of the people who had hurt him. When Wayne saw Noah at the art gallery after Terrence's death, he made the cruel joke that Tate could never have been attracted to Noah because Noah's last name was a problem, and so was Noah's hair. Andrew understood what Wayne was implying. Wayne was referring to Tate's supposed pattern of being fucked by blue men with black hair and connecting that pattern to the Tate's family name. In Wayne's twisted logic, Noah stood absolutely no chance because he didn't fit the physical and familial pattern Wayne believed Tate had deliberately maintained. But Andrew understood there was something deeper behind the joke. Wayne believed Tate couldn't allow himself to become romantically close to anyone without risking someone noticing the similarities between Tate and the people in his family. If Tate became emotionally or romantically involved with someone who knew too much, eventually someone might start asking questions and putting two and two together. That was why Wayne said Noah stood no chance. To Wayne, Noah wasn't simply the wrong type for Tate. Noah represented a threat to the secrecy Tate had spent his entire life protecting. If Tate allowed himself to become genuinely close to someone, that person might eventually notice the contradictions, the family resemblance, and the secrets hidden behind the blue name. And Wayne knew exactly how frightening that possibility was for Tate. When Tate had taken Riley to his father's study to give him a check to bribe him to leave Noah alone, Tate had warned Riley that his PR firm could be seriously affected by standing too close to Tate. Tate told him that once a certain group of people, probably friends of Wayne, were introduced to Riley, everyone would know exactly who Riley was associated with. Tate's warning was brutal. Who would hire a PR executive to protect and maintain good PR for important clients when Riley's fiancé and future husband Noah was closely related to Tate Blue, a survivor of incest, rape, and familial pedophilia? Tate knew exactly how quickly reputations could be destroyed. In his world, people didn't need proof before deciding someone was dangerous to associate with. They only needed a connection, a rumor, or a whispered accusation. If they connect you to me, Tate had warned him, they won't care how good you are at your job. Riley had stared at him. Tate had continued, making the point painfully clear. Once the wrong people started talking, Riley's professional reputation could become collateral damage simply because he was Noah's fiancé. No one would touch you with a 6-inch pole, Tate had said coldly. Andrew understood what Tate was doing. The check wasn't simply a bribe. Tate was trying to buy Riley's distance from Noah because he believed Riley's association with Noah could eventually expose secrets Tate had spent his entire life protecting. The last thing Riley's clients would want to think about would be families like Tate's touching each other or remembering incestuous child rape. The very thought might make clients sick, and Andrew understood why Tate believed the scandal could destroy Riley's career. But even that wasn't the worst part of Tate's family. That was pretty bad, but it was not the family business. If anyone ever found out about Tate's family business, Riley would be unemployed. He would never get a job in the PR entertainment world again. His professional reputation would be permanently connected to the Blue family scandal, regardless of whether Riley himself had done anything wrong. Andrew finally understood why Tate had lied his whole life. Tate hadn't only been protecting himself. He didn't want Noah to be affected, and later, he didn't want his innocent mother to have her entire life blow up in her face. Tate knew that revealing everything wouldn't simply expose the people who had hurt him. It would destroy the life Talia believed she had lived. Andrew could only imagine what it would be like for Talia to discover that the man she had married, the man she had trusted, the father of her child, was the ringleader of the family, a human trafficker, a baby breeder, and had tricked Talia by hiding horrifying secrets from her. Imagine being Talia and finding out who Terrence really was. Imagine discovering that the life you thought you knew had been built around secrets you never even knew existed. That was the burden Tate had carried. He had convinced himself that lying was the only way to keep Noah and Talia from having their worlds destroyed along with his own. If everyone in LA desired Tate due to his looks, sex appeal, body, money, and social status, no one would ever suspect the real vileness beneath the surface. It was a magic trick, and nobody knew the reality because every day Tate had to wake up with the first thing that would pop into his mind was what would happen if anyone ever found out my secret. He would rather die. He wondered for the 100th time, how did Tate find out about the secrets? How old was he when it happened? Did someone tell him or did he figure it out himself? Andrew knew Tate had always been sharp, hyper-aware, and suspicious in a way that came from necessity. But even that couldn't fully explain the depth of the burdens he carried. If someone had told him, that would mean an intentional revelation, a handoff of knowledge that could have shattered him instantly. But Andrew didn't think that had happened. Tate's history was built on observation, deduction, and surviving moments no one else understood. And now Andrew finally understood the source. The trauma, the fear, the obsession, it all started there, that night in that room with Wayne watching, and Tate powerless, forced to endure. Andrew whispered to himself, a shiver running down his spine. So that's it, that's why everything started then. The timeline wasn't just history, it was the blueprint of Tate's mind, explaining every seemingly inexplicable choice he had ever made. The hypersexuality, the vigilance, the obsessive closeness with Noah, it wasn't random. It was a calculated, instinctive response to something that began 15, maybe 18 years ago. Andrew's chest tightened. He could finally see the trajectory clearly. The seed planted by that first encounter had grown into every twisted, intense, and utterly human behavior Tate had displayed since. Andrew stood alone in the Blue family living room while midnight settled heavily against the windows. The house felt mausoleum quiet. Too elegant to feel alive. Soft chandelier light spilled across marble floors and dark wood paneling while the massive portrait gallery covering the walls watched silently from every direction. Decades of photographs climbed toward the ceiling in flawless arrangement. Family portraits, charity galas, school ceremonies, holiday parties, celebrity dinners, foundation events, summer vacations. A carefully curated visual history of the Blue family dynasty. Andrew had passed this wall dozens of times before without really seeing it. Tonight he couldn't stop looking. His reading glasses rested low on his nose as he moved slowly before the portraits, exhausted eyes drifting from frame to frame. And there was Tate. Everywhere. As a child. As an adolescent. As a teenager becoming painfully beautiful despite looking like he wanted to disappear from the world entirely. Andrew frowned faintly. Even in childhood photographs, Tate never looked comfortable being seen. Sometimes angry. Sometimes hollow. Sometimes visibly detached. But never safe. Never natural. Andrew had always known Tate hated photographs with an intensity that bordered on irrational fear. No candid pictures. No recordings. No interviews. No social media. Once during a summer trip abroad in Madrid, Andrew had snapped a picture of Tate asleep against the window during a train ride. Tate woke moments later, saw the phone in Andrew's hand, and instantly panicked. Delete it. Andrew remembered laughing softly at first. It's just a picture. The terror in Tate's voice had stunned him silent. He deleted it immediately. Later, Tate apologized but refused to explain why he reacted so violently. Andrew assumed trauma. Paranoia maybe. Body dysmorphia. But standing here tonight, staring at these portraits, he realized none of those explanations had ever truly fit. His eyes moved upward slowly while staring at the Blue family tree. Frame after frame. Years unfolding across the wall. And in almost every image. The lover. Always near Tate. Sometimes behind him. Sometimes beside him. Sometimes standing just outside direct focus. At first glance it seemed ordinary enough. Families and close social circles repeated the same faces constantly. But tonight something felt wrong. Andrew stepped closer. One winter gala portrait caught his attention first. Tate looked maybe 14, standing stiffly near the edge of the room in a dark formal suit. His ex-lover stood several feet behind him, speaking with guests. Andrew narrowed his eyes slightly. Something about the image unsettled him. Not obvious. Settled. Like his brain recognized a pattern before he consciously understood it. He adjusted his glasses, then moved to another frame. Summer estate party. Again the lover stood near Tate. Another. Christmas dinner. Another. School fundraiser. Again. 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 Always there. Always watching Tate. Andrew's pulse slowed strangely. He leaned closer toward a portrait from Tate's adolescence, and accidentally looked from Tate's face to the lover's. Then back again. His stomach tightened sharply. No. The thought came instantly. Impossible. He stared harder. The eyes. Not similar. Too similar. Andrew blinked rapidly. No. He stepped toward another frame. A beach photograph. Tate standing near the shoreline, staring downward while wind pushed dark hair across his face. The lover behind him smiling faintly toward someone outside the frame. Andrew's blood went cold. He moved frantically now from portrait to portrait. Tate at 12. Tate at 15. Tate at 17. Andrew stopped breathing for a moment. Oh my God. The whisper escaped him involuntarily. His fingers tightened around the frame hard enough to hurt. No. No, no, no. The room suddenly felt wrong around him. Tilted somehow. His eyes darted desperately across the portraits again. And then he saw it. Not in one photograph. In all of them. The staging. Every formal portrait positioned Tate carefully away from the lover. Different angles. Different lighting. Different posture. Enough distance to prevent people from unconsciously comparing their faces directly. Andrew's pulse thundered violently. The photographs had been arranged around the truth. Not enough to hide it completely. Enough to bury it beneath context. Enough that nobody looked too closely. His reading glasses slid lower down his nose. He barely noticed. That was why Tate hated photographs. Not vanity. Not insecurity. Evidence. Every image documented something no one was supposed to notice. The third secret. The worst one. Not simply the affair. Blood. Andrew physically staggered backward. The lover wasn't only Tate's lover. The lover was more than his father's partner. His glasses slipped off entirely and shattered against the marble floor. The crack echoed through the room. Andrew stared upward in horror. He vomited on the floor by the portrait gallery. And suddenly everything made sense. Tate destroying photographs. Avoiding cameras. Refusing publicity. Panicking when photographed unexpectedly. The shame. Dear God, the shame. Andrew covered his mouth. Because now he understood why Tate spoke about himself like something contaminated. Why he once whispered, "I think something about me was wrong before I was even born." At the time, Andrew thought it was depression talking. Self-hatred. Trauma. Now the memory made him feel sick. Tate believed his very existence was proof of something monstrous. Andrew bent forward abruptly and vomited onto the marble floor. The force of it burned his throat violently. His whole body shook afterward. Oh my God. His voice cracked apart. The portraits loomed silently above him. Watching. Documenting. Andrew wiped his mouth with trembling fingers and looked upward again despite every instinct begging him not to. Because now he couldn't stop seeing it. Every photograph transformed. Their affair grew worse with age. By adulthood, Tate had become nearly impossible not to compare directly once someone noticed the pattern. No wonder he disappeared from public life. No wonder he hated mirrors. No wonder he looked physically ill whenever cameras appeared. Every photograph threatened exposure. Andrew stepped shakily toward another portrait. A candid summer gathering. Tate looked maybe 11 years old. Young enough that seeing the fear in his face became unbearable. The lover stood nearby, watching him with soft, unmistakable intimacy. And Tate. Tate looked terrified. Not annoyed. Not shy. Terrified. Andrew's blood ran cold. Because now he understood what cameras meant to Tate. Not memories. Evidence. Permanent evidence. Evidence that became more dangerous every year his face changed. Andrew remembered another conversation suddenly. One night Tate had asked quietly, "Do you think people can inherit corruption?" Andrew answered immediately no. But Tate went silent afterward with this hollow expression Andrew never forgot. Now he understood. Tate thought he carried something rotten inside his blood itself. Andrew looked helplessly at the portraits again. The gallery no longer resembled family history. It resembled a carefully managed crime scene. Tiny adjustments everywhere. Tate partially obscured behind taller guests. Different camera heights. Strategic positioning. Distance maintained during formal portraits. Enough to keep the resemblance from becoming immediately obvious. Someone had noticed long ago. Someone understood exactly what the photographs risked revealing. Andrew's stomach twisted again. And the worst part, Tate knew too. Of course he did. He grew up watching his own face slowly betray him. Watching mirrors become dangerous. Watching photographs become proof. No wonder he wanted to disappear. No wonder he called himself vile. No wonder he once whispered against Andrew's shoulder late at night. If people knew the truth about me, they'd think I was disgusting. Andrew had argued fiercely against that. Now tears blurred his vision because he finally understood the depth of Tate's horror. Tate didn't simply fear judgment. He feared revelation. The kind that destroys entire lives instantly. Andrew stared upward at the portraits one final time. A dynasty frozen in polished frames. Smiling faces. Beautiful lies. And hidden inside every image. A child trying desperately not to be seen because his own face carried the secret he could never survive explaining aloud. "Oh my God," Andrew murmured, his voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the AC. The third secret was the darkest of all. It was the reason Tate had once called himself vile and unnatural, the reason he had put a gun to his own throat rather than tell Noah the truth. It was the truth about his own worth, about his capacity to love, about the impossible burden of his fears, desires, and survival instincts. He had believed truly that he was unfit for love, incapable of human connection without exposing himself and everyone around him to danger and pain. And instead of revealing that darkness to Noah, his closest companion, the one person who had loved him, Tate had internalized it, forcing himself into isolation and self-preservation, teetering on the edge of destruction rather than trust. Tate kept quiet about his lover because it would also expose the third secret, and that couldn't happen. Andrew's chest tightened as he processed it all. Each secret alone was enough to shape a life. Together they explained everything: Tate's hypersexuality, his obsessive protection of Noah, the rules about sleeping arrangements, the rigid control of his environment. They explained the meltdowns at 25, the emotional intensity, the quiet fear that ran beneath his carefully constructed composure. And knowing that, the weight of it pressing down on him made Tate want to kill himself. Not because he didn't love Noah, but because the truth was too heavy, too destructive, too dangerous. Who knew what it would do to Noah if he saw the cracks, the darkness, the secrets Tate had carried alone for decades? Who knew how the boy would survive the revelation? Everything Noah believed, enjoyed, and relied on in Talia's house was a lie. The only thing that was genuine was how the boys felt about each other. The Blues weren't a happy family, but one who loved each other too much. The wealth, privilege, and avoidance of accountability were how they hid behind a facade so thin that a single word would scatter the illusion, ruining everything Noah believed. With great talent comes a great desire for self-fuckability. Andrew tried to imagine what Tate must have felt like growing up surrounded by a family whose deepest secrets he could never speak aloud. He imagined the shame first. The constant, suffocating shame of knowing that something was terribly wrong while being too young to understand how to escape it. The despair of carrying knowledge that no child should ever have been forced to carry. Tate must have felt completely alone, even when he was surrounded by family. Andrew imagined the isolation, the feeling that there was nowhere safe to go, no one he could tell, and no way to explain why he was hurting without exposing everything that everyone seemed determined to hide. And then there was the self-loathing. Andrew wondered how many mornings Tate had looked into the mirror and felt disgusted by the person staring back at him. How many times had Tate thought he was somehow contaminated by what had been done to him? How many times had he blamed himself for things that had never been his fault? Tate couldn't look at himself because his own reflection had become associated with everything he hated. He looked like them. That was the part Andrew found especially heartbreaking. Tate could wash his hands, he could change his clothes, he could leave the room, he could grow older and become powerful enough that no one could easily control him. But he couldn't escape his own face. Every morning, the mirror gave him the same answer. There he was. And to a traumatized child, that face had become something he couldn't bear to see. Andrew imagined Tate going through childhood feeling gross every day, carrying a hatred toward himself that should have belonged entirely to the people who had harmed him. The shame had been placed on the wrong person. Tate had survived what others had done to him, yet somehow he had grown up believing that he was the disgusting one. That was the cruelty of it. Tate hadn't merely been isolated from other people. He had become isolated from himself. Andrew could understand. He knew what it felt like to believe that simply being alive made you something terrible, almost as though your existence itself were an offense against God, a sin. He understood the disturbing feeling of wanting to rip off your own skin because you couldn't survive in your current state, because being inside yourself had become unbearable. After everything that had been done to Tate and everything Tate was and how he lived, Andrew understood why he had created such a carefully constructed facade. Tate created an image that made everyone desire him. He became attractive, confident, successful, charming, and seemingly untouchable because the idea of being his authentic self might have made Tate no longer want to be alive. It was a coping mechanism. Tate used being overly desired by everyone so no one would suspect his secret. If everyone wanted him, admired him, envied him, or wanted to be close to him, then perhaps nobody would look closely enough to see the frightened person underneath the performance. Andrew had compassion for Tate because Andrew knew what it felt like to feel the way Tate did every day. When Tate had told his mother, Talia, that it was unbearable to be Tate Blue every day, Andrew understood that Tate wasn't speaking only about the abuse that had been done to him. It wasn't just because of what his family had done to him. It was everything. It was having to wake up every morning and pretend to be a normal boy. It was having to smile, attend school, speak to his family, play with other children, and act as though nothing was wrong. It was having to live inside the identity of Tate Blue while carrying things that no child should ever have been forced to carry. That was what made playing Tate Blue unbearable. Andrew understood that Tate had never been given the freedom to simply be a child. He had been forced to perform normality while privately fighting shame, despair, isolation, self-loathing, and the constant fear that someone might discover the truth. And Andrew finally understood that Tate's facade wasn't proof that he had never been hurting. It was evidence of how desperately he had been trying to survive. Being Tate Blue was unbearable. The puzzle had a starting point, and now Andrew understood why Tate had become the way he was. Susie walked up behind Andrew, checking in with him to see if he was doing all right. She was worried since her friend had been upstairs for a while, then came downstairs in a harried attitude. Andrew's hands shook as he spoke, his voice tight with urgency. "Susie, I've called Dr. Michaels. We need to put Tate in a psych ward, at least for 72 hours. He's a danger to himself." Susie's eyes widened, her fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen table. "Andrew, are you serious? He'll never agree. He's always hated hospitals, hated being told what to do." "I know," Andrew said, his jaw set. "But look at him, he's spiraling. He's not safe here, not in this house, not anywhere near us. We have to do something before it's too late." Andrew grabbed Talia's phone from the counter. "I'm calling the hospital to reserve a guest suite for him. He won't listen to me. He won't admit his issues to anyone. Professionals will come get him. They'll assess Tate for 72 hours, just to stabilize him, get him away from everything for a little while." Susie exhaled, fear and helplessness warring in her expression. "Andrew, he's so proud, he won't forgive this." "I don't care," Andrew said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "I don't care if he forgives us, I care if he lives." He dialed quickly, his thumb hovering over the call button. In the background, Tate's footsteps echoed somewhere in the house. Andrew knew the blonde wouldn't stay still. Tate didn't want to be here anymore, not in this house, not anywhere that forced him to confront the weight of his own mind and the ghosts of his past. Tate had refused help before. He'd refused every attempt at guidance, every invitation to open up, every hand extended in concern. But now the danger was immediate. Andrew's heart raced as he spoke to the hospital operator, explaining the situation, describing Tate's erratic behavior, the threats he'd made, and the risk to his own life. Susie watched Andrew's face, seeing the determination etched there. She knew he wasn't overreacting. Tate was dangerous right now, but not to anyone else. The danger was to himself, and that made it urgent. "I'm not doing this to punish him," Andrew said quietly, almost to himself. "I'm doing this to help him before it's too late." The operator assured him help was on the way. Andrew hung up, feeling the weight of the decision settle like a stone in his chest. He glanced toward the staircase, imagining Tate wandering the hall, restless, unsettled, desperate to escape. This was the only way. He had to act, even if Tate hated him forever for it, because right now, keeping Tate alive mattered more than anything else. Susie noticed Andrew was crying, as though something had deeply distressed him. He looked pale, and she could tell by the way his jaw was clenched that he had seen or experienced something deeply disturbing. His expression had changed completely. The usual composure he carried was gone, replaced by a look of shock and sorrow. Susie watched him carefully, realizing that whatever Andrew was thinking about had affected him more than he wanted to show. He looked almost sick with emotion, his eyes filled with tears as he struggled to process what he had just remembered. She didn't interrupt him. She simply stayed beside him, recognizing that sometimes a person could hear something so painful that there was no immediate way to respond to it. Andrew's tears weren't merely sadness. They were the reaction of someone who had finally understood just how much suffering another person had been carrying in silence. Andrew reached for his gun, but before doing anything else, he checked the magazine and then immediately secured the weapon where Tate could not access it. Susie watched him, visibly unsettled. Noah came upstairs to check on Susie's progress with Andrew and stopped when he noticed what Andrew was doing. "What's the gun for?" Susie asked. Andrew looked at her. "It's not for Tate," he said firmly. "If Tate dissociates, we don't introduce another weapon into the situation. We keep him away from anything dangerous and give him space until he comes back." Noah nodded. He had already brought a taser as an emergency precaution, but even that was meant to be a last resort rather than something they intended to use against Tate. "If he becomes physically aggressive," Noah said, "we get everyone else away from him and call for professional help. Nobody needs to shoot him." Andrew nodded. The goal wasn't to punish Tate or overpower him. It was to keep everyone safe, including Tate. Being inside the blue house made Andrew physically sick. The atmosphere, the history, and everything he now understood about Tate made it difficult for him to remain composed. Andrew walked over to the family portrait hanging in the gallery and carefully took the entire portrait off the wall. Susie, Noah, and Talia stared at him in surprise. "What's that for?" Susie asked. Andrew held the portrait carefully. "It's for Tate," he said, "something he can look at when he's at the psych ward." Andrew was lying. The portrait wasn't actually for Tate. He was planning to take it to Dr. Michael so they could talk about what was wrong with Tate and what the photograph might reveal about the family dynamics surrounding him. Andrew wanted another professional perspective before he made any conclusions. But he didn't want Tate's friends or his mother to know that yet. Andrew looked down at the portrait. The entire Blue family was there, frozen in time in a picture that suddenly felt completely different to him. What had once looked like an ordinary family portrait now seemed to contain years of secrets, suffering, and unanswered questions. He carefully carried the portrait away from the wall. For now, the truth about why he had taken the entire family portrait would remain his secret. Susie's hands trembled and she took a shallow breath. "We have to stay calm, we can't make Tate more nervous." Noah didn't remember the drive to the psych ward 3 days after Tate was admitted to the hospital for medical treatment. He only remembered the fluorescent lights in the lobby and the way his name sounded foreign when he said it at the front desk. "I'm here to see Tate Blue." The guard behind the glass typed slowly, eyes flicking across the screen. The pause stretched too long. "I'm sorry," the guard said flatly, "you're not on the visitor list." Noah blinked. "That's not possible." The guard's expression didn't change. "He declined your name specifically." The words landed like a physical blow. No, Noah said, shaking his head. That's wrong, he wouldn't. He was very clear, the guard interrupted. He does not want you here. The finality in the man's voice hollowed something out in Noah's chest. For a moment he just stood there, hands on the counter, staring at the institutional beige wall behind the guard. Tate didn't want him there, after everything, after decades. He turned and walked out without another word. Susie opened her front door to Noah, pounding with his fist. Noah stood there, eyes red, jaw tight. Why am I not on the list? He demanded immediately. Susie froze. What? They said Tate doesn't want me there. His voice cracked with disbelief. Since when does Tate get to decide I don't see him? Susie stepped aside slowly, letting him in. Noah. No, he snapped. You don't get to know me. I've been there through every episode, every breakdown, every time he couldn't breathe. I was there, and now suddenly I'm banned. Susie swallowed. She hadn't expected this confrontation. He's not stable, she said carefully. Andrew thought. Andrew thought? Noah barked a humorless laugh. Andrew has known him for 5 minutes compared to me. Susie flinched at that. Noah paced the living room, running both hands through his hair. He chooses me when he's emotionally drowning. He calls for me when he dissociates. He talks to me when no one else can reach him, and now he doesn't want me there? His voice dropped, quieter but more dangerous. That doesn't make sense. Susie watched him carefully. There it was, the same intensity Andrew had noticed, the same pull. He's trying to stabilize, she said softly. Sometimes that means removing triggers. Noah stopped packing. Trigger, he repeated. Susie hesitated. You were there, she said carefully. Most of his episodes, they circle back to you. The car, the ice cream trip, the dissociation, the voice, you're at the center of it. Noah's face shifted, anger bleeding into something more fragile. That's because I was there, he said, because I stayed. Susie's eyes softened, but she didn't look away. Or, she said gently, because you're the only person he feels safe unraveling in front of. Silence. Noah looked toward the window, jaw tight again. So what, am I supposed to just disappear? That's supposed to help him. He asked for space, Susie said. For the first time in a while, we need to listen. Noah let out a slow breath that trembled. He's never kept me away before, Noah said, not once. Susie felt the weight of that. It was true, Tate had always chosen Noah. And now he hadn't. That should tell you how bad it is, she said quietly. Noah closed his eyes briefly. Anger warred with hurt across his face. Or it tells me someone convinced him I'm the problem. Susie didn't answer. Because she didn't know which was worse. Noah didn't simmer. He exploded while standing in Susie's living room, shaking like a live wire, walking on the carpet so hard the floorboards creaked beneath him. Extensive treatment? He snapped when she tried to explain. What does that even mean? They locked him up and cut me out. That's not treatment. Susie folded her arms, exhausted. It's not just locking him up. He's in intensive stabilization, daily trauma therapy, group sessions, psychiatric evaluations. They're monitoring his sleep, his dissociation, everything. Noah laughed sharply. Group therapy? You think Tate Blue is sitting in a circle talking about his feelings? They're making him, Susie said quietly. That stopped him. She continued carefully. They have him in individual trauma processing twice a day, structured routine, no isolation, no spiraling. They're assessing suicidal risk, dissociative episodes, and possible seizure activity. It's not light work. Noah's jaw flexed. And I'm banned. Susie nodded slowly, for now. He dragged a hand down his face. He doesn't even let me leave the room when he's spiraling. He panics if I walk out, and now suddenly I'm the one he doesn't want. Susie hesitated. Andrew thinks. The bond between you two is powerful, but it might also be reinforcing something. Noah turned on her instantly. Reinforcing what? Dependency, she said, or trauma looping. The words landed hard. Noah's voice dropped, dangerously calm. No, what Tate and I have isn't dependency or trauma bonding. I inspired Tate to be the best version of himself. I don't make him weak or isolated. So what? Do the doctors think differently and they're trying to break our connection? They're trying to stabilize him without leaning on you as his anchor. Silence. Noah stared at the wall, chest rising and falling too fast. You don't understand, he said finally. He doesn't lean on me, we survive together, that's not the same thing. Susie watched him carefully. That's exactly what makes it complicated. They don't get to decide what we are, he muttered. They don't get to reframe it. Susie sighed. Maybe they're not reframing it, maybe they're trying to give him space to see it clearly. Noah stopped moving. And what if clearly means he decides I'm too much, he asked. The anger was gone now. What remained was fear. Susie swallowed. I don't think this is about pushing you away, she said carefully. I think it's about seeing whether he can stand without holding onto you. Noah stared at the floor. And what if he doesn't want to stand alone, he whispered. Susie didn't have an answer. Inside the ward, Tate's days were rigidly structured. Morning psychiatric check-ins, medication assessments, trauma-focused cognitive therapy, guided grounding exercises, exposure mapping, afternoons in group rooms with fluorescent lights and folding chairs where strangers spoke about abuse, addiction, and dissociation. At first, Tate barely spoke. He sat straight-backed, composed, hands folded neatly in his lap like nothing inside him was fractured. When other patients cried, he watched with eerie calm. When therapists asked about flashbacks, he redirected. When they mentioned attachment patterns, his jaw tightened. But they were patient. They noticed the micro-freezes when certain words were used, the way his breathing shifted when car accidents were mentioned, the subtle dissociation when someone spoke about childhood protection. In individual sessions, he deflected with logic, negotiation language, clinical detachment. Until they asked about Noah. Then the mask flickered. Why is he not on your visitor list? The therapist asked gently. Tate's fingers curled slightly against his knees. He complicates things, Tate said evenly. How? He makes it harder to separate. Separate from what? Tate's throat moved, his voice dropped a fraction. From survival mode. The therapist leaned forward slightly. Does he trigger you? A long pause. No, Tate said carefully, he stabilizes me. Then why remove him? Another pause, longer this time. Because if I stabilize through him, Tate said quietly, I never learned to stabilize alone. The therapist didn't respond immediately. And that scares you, she asked. Tate's eyes flicked away. Yes. Because inside the ward, under bright clinical lights and relentless therapeutic scrutiny, Tate was being asked to do something he had never done in his life. Exist without Noah as his immediate mirror, anchor, or shield. And outside those locked doors, Noah was discovering something just as destabilizing. He might not be the one Tate chooses this time. The session started normally. Too normal. Tate entered, closed the door quietly, adjusted the chair by exactly half an inch before sitting. He placed his hands flat on his thighs, feet aligned with the legs of the chair, posture upright. Dr. Klein noticed the precision. I'd like to revisit something from last time, she began gently. Tate gave a polite nod. Go ahead. I'd like to talk directly about your trauma. The word had barely left her mouth before the shift happened. It was immediate. Not explosive, not dramatic. Controlled. Tate's spine straightened further, his expression flattened into something cool and distant. I don't believe that's necessary. It is, she said calmly. No, he replied evenly, it's not. She kept her tone steady. Your dissociation, the seizure activity, the somatic flashbacks. Stress responses, he interrupted. To trauma. He inhaled slowly through his nose. You're anchoring to a presupposition. I'm responding to clinical evidence. Tate snorted. Tate, Dr. Klein said gently, folding her hands in her lap, I know you don't want to be here, and I know part of you would rather insist nothing's wrong than even consider the possibility that you're hurting. Tate shook his head immediately. I didn't suffer from trauma, I'm perfectly fine the way I am, I'm rich, I have hang-ups sure, but that doesn't mean I'm some psych case, I don't care what Andrew told you, there's nothing wrong with me, I want to go home. Dr. Klein smiled faintly, not condescending, just patient. Andrew didn't tell me anything about your past because whatever he knows is confidential. You paid him $1 a few weeks ago, so legally and ethically he's silent about your private information. You're wrong about me, Tate, I actually do care about you, she said. That's why I became a psychologist in the first place. I wanted to help people, and honestly, I think you're someone who could genuinely benefit from intensive one-on-one trauma therapy. Tate looked away, his jaw tightening. I also want you to know something important, Dr. Klein continued. I made a point not to read your file before meeting you. I didn't want to walk in here carrying someone else's version of you. No former doctors, no psychiatric evaluations, no opinions from other professionals. I wanted to meet you first and form my own impression without bias. That caught Tate's attention, even if only slightly. You have access to an incredible support staff here, Dr. Klein said. People who are trained to help if you let them. I'm not asking you to reveal your deepest secrets today. You don't even have to talk about anything you consider important yet. But you do have these 72 hours. Use them to think. Think about what? Tate muttered. What you want your life to feel like, Dr. Klein answered softly. What keeps following you, what you're tired of carrying, what goals you'd have if you stopped trying so hard to convince yourself you don't need help. Why don't we talk about Riley, Noah's fiancé, Dr. Klein said softly. The mention of Riley's name made Tate go still for a moment before irritation and jealousy flashed across his face. Dr. Klein noticed immediately. You have very strong feelings about him, she observed. Why don't you tell me about those feelings? She scribbled a few sentences into her notebook while watching Tate carefully, not like he was a specimen under glass, but like she genuinely saw him as a person whose emotions mattered. I hate that man, Tate said flatly. Because he's taking away the boy you love, Dr. Klein asked calmly, or is it something more complicated than that, maybe a combination of reasons? Tate crossed his arms tightly over his chest. I fantasize about putting my hands around Riley's throat and squeezing. Dr. Klein did not look shocked. If anything, her expression became more focused. Intense jealousy is normal, she said evenly. Especially for someone in your position. From what I understand, you haven't had extensive romantic experience with men. You're used to women, used to relationships that fit the version of yourself you were taught to present. Having overwhelming feelings for a man, particularly someone emotionally central to your life, can complicate how you process attachment, possessiveness, shame, and rejection. Tate's jaw tightened again, but he didn't interrupt her. I'm hearing anger, Dr. Klein continued. But underneath that anger, I suspect there's another emotion driving it. Usually rage like this doesn't come from hatred alone. It comes from fear, grief, inadequacy, abandonment, maybe even humiliation. Her eyes lifted from the notebook. When you think about Riley, Tate, do you feel replaced? She asked softly. Or do you feel like Noah chose something that you believe could never openly become for him? Dr. Klein reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small teddy bear, worn soft around the seams from years of being handled by anxious patients. She held it out toward Tate. Why don't you hold this for me? She said gently. Tate stared at it with visible annoyance. What am I, 5? It's not about your age, Dr. Klein replied calmly. I want you to direct your feelings toward the bear. Sometimes people express emotions more honestly when they have something physical to project onto. I want to see how your anger presents itself and what emotion is underneath it. Reluctantly, Tate took the teddy bear with one hand, gripping it harder than necessary, holding the bear backwards. Have you ever shared these negative feelings with Riley? She asked. A dark smile slowly spread across Tate's face. I tried to pay him off once, he admitted. Offered him money, connections, cars, all kinds of things if he'd leave Noah alone. Stubborn bastard wouldn't budge. Dr. Klein remained composed, though her expression tightened slightly. Trying to bribe the fiancé of the person you love isn't acceptable behavior, Tate. You understand that, don't you? He looked away without answering. I'm not here to judge you, she continued carefully, but I do think it's important for you to recognize the impact of your actions. I'm fairly certain Noah would have strong feelings about what you tried to do. Tate squeezed the teddy bear harder. I don't know Noah personally, Dr. Klein said, but most people would feel deeply hurt hearing that someone attempted to manipulate or remove the person they chose to marry, especially if that someone claimed to love them. For the first time since the session began, Tate's confidence flickered. Dr. Klein noticed immediately.